welcome to this briefing on an ongoing study being conducted by ASAE Research Foundation. The study is on associations as catalyst for industry-focused or external innovation. I am Satish Nambisan. I'm the researcher in this project, and I'm also a professor at Case Western Reserve University. And with me is Liz Lucas. Liz?
Hi, yes, I'm the chair of ASAE Research Foundation's Innovation Task Force. I'm also the executive director and CEO with Seroptimus International of the Americas. And I'm very pleased to be able to be with you and Satish today to share what we've recently learned. So let me just give you an overview of the Research Foundation project. Our opportunity was that we believe that external forces create a space for associations to serve as an igniter or catalyst of innovation in their industry or profession. And therefore, our objective became to determine and define the cultural and practices established by associations that are successful in fostering and sustaining innovation, again, in a profession or in an industry that it represents.
Yes, so, we have been doing this study, and I just wanted to, before we look at the findings, preliminary findings, we just want to emphasize, like Liz was saying, that this study is not focused on how associations innovate internally in terms of its offerings or business model. It is focused on how associations can play a role in external innovation, in innovation in the industry. So it's an external focused initiatives. So as Liz was saying, our focus was on external or industry focused innovation. And we are interested in learning a few things. One is, what are the different ways in which associations can play these roles to be as a catalyst or igniter of innovation in the industry or profession? What does it take in terms of culture and capabilities? And what are some best practices? So to find out these things, we have been conducting studies. And in fact, we finished two studies, and we are in the process of going to this third study. The first study we did was in-depth interviews with association CEOs. And we found some good insights on some of these leading in associations in innovating with the industry or profession. Those insights helped us to develop a questionnaire, which we used for a larger scale survey, which also we recently completed. We had 439 respondents at about a 9% or 10% response rate. And so today we are going to brief you on the findings from this study 1 and study 2. Following that, in the future, we're going to do a focus group based, that it will be study 3. And we'll talk about that very briefly towards the end of this briefing. So from the interviews and the surveys, we found that associations can play 8 different roles to help the industry manage change associated with the external force. So you can think about this as 3 phases of the change management. So anticipating change, coping with ongoing change, and adapting to a change that has already taken place. And for these, we identified 8 different roles. I'm going to very briefly go through these roles and then come back to this broader framework and show you what we've learned. So the first role is that of a futurist, which is essentially, does the association help the industry see ahead what is coming around the corner, and also interpret in a way that is meaningful or actionable for the industry? The second role is that of a truth teller. If there is a change that is anticipated or ongoing, is the industry or profession really acknowledging that? If it's not, then is the association helping the industry acknowledge that by bringing evidence, hard evidence and data, and persuading the industry to acknowledge it? This is very important. And so that is the second role. The third role is to offer a safe space to bring together diverse stakeholders in the industry so that they can develop a shared understanding of an emergent disruptive force or driver of change. So here it's to really facilitate a structured dialogue. That's the key role that associations would play. The next role is that of an incubator, incubating innovation. So this involves investing some resources or some funding to pursue different types of solutions, incubating them, and then sharing those findings with the industry. And just give you one example, the National Association of College Stores, NACS, in the late 2000, they found that the digital technology is going to replace textbooks, or not replace, but digitize textbooks. And so the print versions are going to be going away. And that is a big change for campus stores. So NACS invested in incubating or experimenting with different solutions, and then shared those findings. And that made a big difference for campus stores to adapt to the whole digitization of textbooks. So that's a good example of the role of an incubator. Associations can also play a role in helping the industry adopt or implement a solution. So even if the solution is available, there might be other barriers to adopting it. And for example, regulatory barriers. And so associations can go and advocate for changes at the government, federal, state, or local levels to make sure that these barriers are removed. So that's a role of an implementation partner. Sometimes the changes come without notice, as we had with the COVID-19 pandemic. So when the change is here, there's not much time for associations to think about, or the industry or profession to plan ahead. So here is the place where a rapid action force role comes in. Associations have to bring the tools and resources in a very rapid manner and make them accessible to the industry or profession so they can actually cope with this ongoing change. So this really focuses on how well the associations can identify helpful tools and techniques and other resources and bring them together in a way that is useful for the industry or profession. The next role relates to best practices. So here, these requires associations to really look far and wide, both inside and outside the industry, to identify what are some of the best practices associated with its processes, offerings of the industry, best business model, and how can the association help the industry adopt these best practices. And that also is a very important role. The eighth role and the last role is that of a learning ecosystem orchestrator. Here, the association is helping the industry engage in continuous learning. Learning is a very important part of change management. And so trying to bring together the different participants and providing the facilities for people to share knowledge, to engage in continuous learning is very important. So what we found is in the survey, we asked the respondents to what extent they have engaged in one or more of these roles. And this is what we found. We found that by and large, associations engage in the rapid action force and best practices and the Big 10. Those are the roles that are very dominant. And you can see that the mean scores are very high. The red line actually looks at the number of respondents who rated on a 1 to 5 scale, who rated 4 or 5, which means that they're very active in those roles. So as you can see that for 2 of those roles, truth teller and incubator, they are on the much lower side, which means that not many associations are engaging in those 2 roles compared to the roles like Big Tent or rapid action forces, best practices countries. So there is a space for associations to engage or to enhance their involvement in innovation, which is externally focused. And if you go back to that original framework, what we see is that the place where they are least focused are these anticipating change, whereas what they are most focused is in terms of coping and adaptation. So Liz, so one way to look at this is that, is the space for associations to play or to help the industry innovate, is that a valid proposition for the association? How widely is it acknowledged as a value proposition?
Thank you, Satish. That's a great segue. First, I'd like to just acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of roles. There's 8 different ways that an association can help their industry or their profession innovate and really stay relevant. In today's world, many of you may be aware of a book that's recently been updated called The Race for Relevance by Harrison Corver and Mary Byers. And their whole proposition is about associations thriving, not surviving. And so the concept of really what you're proposing, a key value proposition being innovation, is a great opportunity for an association to look at its marketplace and to think about being focused on external focused innovation, or what we've been calling being a catalyst for a profession or industry, and making it into a key value proposition so that the organization or the association has more relevance in a crowded or changing marketplace. I think this is a value that can be used to retain and recruit members and help an association be seen as a thought leader in their industry or their profession.
Right. And I think it also brings that the feeling that associations are really interested in the industry or profession's well-being, and not just the internally focused activities. Now, the next question probably would be, does an association need to play all these roles? Not necessarily. We did find that there is a correlation between the number of roles an association plays and how well it was effective in helping the industry adapt to change. So there is some correlation between the number of roles and performance of the association as an external innovator. But I think associations, like Liz, you mentioned, have to contextualize these roles in their particular industry or profession and see which of these roles make sense and which of these roles together would be more effective. And I think that's a judgment that each association has to make, taking into consideration the things going on in that particular industry or profession.
Well, oftentimes associations think of innovation in the context of generating revenue through new products, programs, and services. But making external focused innovation a key value proposition can really have a great value for an association.
Right, exactly. So the natural question then is, what does it take? What capabilities and culture are required to be effective in this? And so let's talk about culture first. We identified from both the interviews and the survey that there are 3 broad components to the association culture. The culture in the association that would help make it more effective as an innovation catalyst. So the first one is data-driven focus. It really relates to, is there a culture that is around data-based evidence in making decisions, in evaluating options? And that is something which, let me take an example. So the association, American Physical Therapy Association, APTA, in the last maybe around 8 to 10 years, discovered that there are some big changes going on in the profession. One is that there are too many physical therapy programs, physical therapist programs in universities, and the number of programs as it increases, that makes it much more difficult. Because there is a lot more supply of physical therapists. On the other hand, the salaries were going down. So the profession as such was facing a big challenge. And what APTA did was they brought evidence from their own research as well as from outside, real hard evidence, and put together this report and presented to its profession, saying, here is a change that we have to acknowledge, that we have to adapt. And that is really, and that culture that focuses on that is this data-based evidence, that it's not just opinions, it is really data that is talking, and that is very important. The other part of the culture is being open to different ideas and much more collaborative. So here again, there are different perspectives and views of what a change is all about. and developing a shared understanding is very critical. And so that collaborative spirit, again, there are some examples, nice examples that we came across. One is the SIPA, which is the Smart Electric Power Alliance, which really in the electric utility industry, there are two changes going. One is climate change, as we all know. The other is digitization. And so these two changes have radically potential to radically transform how the electric utility industry operates, its business models. So SEPA was really interested in bringing together diverse voices in the industry, both from industry as well as from external stakeholders, and then seeing whether there is a shared understanding that can be developed on this change that is going to happen. So that is a collaborative spirit and openness. And the third component of this culture is experimentation learning. We talked about the NACS doing a lot of experimentation for its campus stores, for digital textbook. So that's a good example that do you do experiments? Do you learn from experiments? And is that being translated to the industry or profession in a way that they can be useful? So when we did the survey, we found that, this, you can see here, the collaboration and openness and spirit, that is a big part that is very much there. But the data-driven focus is not to that extent, comparatively at least, that's not that high. So there is an opportunity for associations to be more data-driven, or at least imbibe that culture more to a greater extent. And I think, Liz, that I think is a very important finding for the associations.
Yeah, it's interesting about this culture of being data-driven being suppressed compared to the other two types of cultures for a culture of external innovation. I'm curious, do you know if the culture of being data-driven has anything to do with the capacity of the association?
I think there is a correlation. Actually, from the survey, we found that there is correlation between association culture and association capability. So there is a correlation between these. For example, if you think about data-driven focus, you can say that, well, do you have the capability to collect the data? Do you have the capability to do research? Do you have the capability to ingest or analyze or interpret the data? So those are all capabilities that would be needed to actually engage in or to make that data-driven culture more realistic. So obviously, when we say there is a culture that is data-driven culture, there are associated capabilities too that we need to invest in, and that capacity has to be brought up.
It would be interesting. I'm not sure if this concept of the correlation between the culture and the capability for data-driven has anything to do with board dialogue. Does this affect the way a board conducts its business? Could it mean that an organization or an association is not as maybe more opinion rich and perhaps more information poor? Not sure, but interesting to take a look at it to help association execs certainly talk to their boards about using data to make decisions, and using data to take more risk with innovation.
Exactly. I think you pointed out one important thing, Les. One is that, do you ask for data before you make a decision? Or are you just looking at the opinions of the different people? I think if there is a data-driven culture in the association, it's probably going to arise in that particular context that before any decision, the association board or the staff or the members would ask for data. And that data is something which they, that comes up at the first point itself in a decision-making process. So, going from here to the capabilities, again, from the interviews and the survey, we found that there are three key capabilities, components of capabilities. One is the informing. Informing relates to not just bringing awareness to the industry or profession, but also building a case for change. So that means not just doing research and bringing some data, but then getting the data, contextualizing the data in that industry or profession, and then saying that, well, this is what this data means for us. And that finding a meaning in the data is really the crucial part of the informing. And most associations may not be doing that. They might be doing research, But it's not just churning out a report. You have to contextualize that report, contextualize that information, and that is where it makes much more meaningful to the industry to act upon that. So that is one part. The second component is organizing, which here is, we talked about the SEPA example earlier. Do you bring to the diverse voices, and do you bring people with conflicting interests? That was the case in the electric utility industry. There are people with different business models that might be conflicting, but SEPA was able to bring together all these different partners or different industry stakeholders into one place and provide a safe space so that they can really honestly share their opinions and perspectives, and together develop a common framework to understand the need for change. So that is organizing. The third capability is supporting, which relates to, do you provide the right set of tools and technologies for industry or profession to implement a change? So advocacy, we talked about earlier. Those are things that are very important, but always may not be at the forefront, but they are really important for the industrial profession to actually implement the change. So these three capabilities, what we found from the survey again, is that organizing is one place where associations are at the forefront. They are doing a great job in helping the industry. But here is a place where a possibility for improving. One is informing, where, like I said, it's not just bring the data, but also using the data to really understand what is going on, and then informing the industry based on that. So just to wrap up, like Liz was saying, the possibility for associations to engage and help the industry in innovating to adapt to change can be an important value proposition. And if it is so, then the board has to, boards of the association have to acknowledge that. That has to be reflected in budgets and other things, the strategies and practices that the association adopts. For example, for anticipating change, what are the different activities it can play in terms of the data-driven focus and experimentation learning, culture, and the capabilities related to informing. So all of these together provide some pathways for associations to improve their effectiveness as a catalyst for external industry-focused innovation.
Well, it's been a real pleasure hearing more about the findings of this innovation research associations as a catalyst for their profession and their industry. Thank you so much, Satish, for leading our effort through the ASAE Research Foundation.
Thank you.